Give it to me straight, or hold my rotted attention. A harmless spout at Nonfiction. The surest sign of a weak trust between us is when we criticize one another behind our backs. A close second is any hesitation to express a negative opinion around each other. But this is not too good a test for those who have more goodwill than bad. Following these, I lose trust in those who, on the whole, talk, write, more than they have listened, read. If I still trust you after this, well, it's because you haven't showered me with advice or tried to sell me something. Whenever I read nonfiction or listen to its verbal counterpart, the speech, rogue sentences, always seem to lie in wait, ready to convince me that I'm better off reading or looking at something that is always true. In other words, it only takes about one disagreement in an author for me to seriously consider spending my time on someone I can trust all the way through. And if, say, it's dangerous to trust them, like in Nietzsche or Schopenhauer, then thoughts of their mighty struggle in life act as bitters do in drinks, adding that layer of complexity or character. Beware then, nonfiction writers, be courageous in life. Make some people laugh and don't be afraid to cry like Hart Crane, or else I'm deeply afraid for both you and I, our writing won't survive. Still, I must be honest and admit I could be mistaking intolerance for idleness, since nonfiction makes me want to grab the pen myself and furiously respond in truth. Above all, I don't want to be misconstrued as wanting to live in La La Land. Whatever branch of knowledge you're interested in, chaos theory, equitation, the study of cadavers, by all means learn it and read its brightest books. There is just something about that term nonfiction that begs my pedantic weenie of a brain to be recalibrated. I want to establish a clearer definition of nonfiction, but that's the problem. I encountered a disagreement in a nonfiction book recently, and now, gearing myself up to tackle the error, I realize how engrossed it is in categorization. And nonfiction is such a lame categorization. Before we can say what nonfiction consists of, since it is negation, we have to say what is not nonfiction. As for fiction, that is but a French and Latin bastardization for story. A few people in charge of no doubt textbooks of a sort between the 12th and 15th centuries had to find a way to do away with some stories they didn't like. Shocker. You know what, Bill? Call it fiction, or that which is invented in the mind. But as Kant shows us, time and space must be measures of the mind if math is to be factual. And if we don't bow to time and space as gods, or fly on philosophy, for meanwhile Milton, Shelley, and Keats show us just how necessary the human mind, I, is to rendering the truth. The bottom line, in clear terms, those who prefer a strict classification of nonfiction as real and fiction as make-believe neglect the immense overlap in every human endeavor between story and fact. In nonfiction as we understand it in the 21st century, still a boundless genre, I do not count anything purely scientific, that is mathematical. That is not the domain of literature or the humanities. I really don't want to bog this essay down with a logical discrepancy, but I cannot refuse illustrating how topsy-turvy of a grip nonfiction has on us. Please see the diagram for the quite tragic fate of nonfiction. It is any writing that falls between 10% story, pure math, pure technique, and 90% story. It is that which beats around the bush. Note, give the reader sight, make knowledgeable love. But we run into a problem because not only is pure math not necessarily negative, but its apodictic, maximally intuited, certainty matches that of love's, or pathos. Therefore, a straight line won't cut it. We better render the relationship between pure math and pure story as a circle broken up by the will to systemization, with 100% representing wholeness, one, or as it's sometimes called, the absolute, the creation of knowledge and love, beauty's husband. Reader, please. I know this is a lot to take in. Even more so than do we need all the visualization we can get.
What did you say?
Please study deeply the diagram above to understand nonfiction's obscure place between pure math and pure story before moving on to the next diagram, the creation of, did I say knowledge? Fiction. Story, poem, truth with character. Further clarifications on the diagram are made throughout the entire essay, but only 2 solid complete read-throughs or listen-throughs will seal the deal. It's that choice every bathroom trip to wash your hands for 20 seconds compared to a splash of water just on the tip of the one dirty hand. I totally get it. To begin, please take a look at nonfiction's position in both diagrams. Look how gray of an area nonfiction is in the first, how likely colorful in number 2. If a repeated study of the diagrams and the explanations immediately following them does not clarify things, please meditate on what it means to categorize purity or even put it on a scale. Consider too that by pure math, logos might be the best representation to account for our general understanding of math. The synthetic a priori stuff that had the Greek who knew logos by 10 different shades, definitions, saying both angle and angel, i.e. pure reason if you believe in such a thing. Pathos can be sympathy or empathy, those stepping stones in and out of love. Ethos is then what we're dealing with in this current nonfiction essay, whether or not you still trust me. Continue. I really don't want to argue with science nerds. They will win. Like Faulkner's Quentin, I don't hate math. I don't. I only want to say that in what we know as nonfiction, even if there is no obvious error, eventually, to some capacity, the other story is left out. For that same reason, the best nonfiction goes to those historians and philosophers and natural scientists that cover every single subject they possibly could have in a span of many works, or one giant. Show me math, show me love. Since they write so much of the truth, character naturally follows. Since it is a class of motive, the neglect of which in the worst nonfiction, bungling the argument in speech, reason out of character, gives way to bias and plain error. Considering all this, how oppressing now does it sound, that division of fiction and nonfiction into real and make-believe. And so the best writers bend that bow and break open logos and pathos, touching their tips again for a spark, and then just letting it out, baby. Go. Go. Behold this character in the form of truth. Enter fate. What's the result of writing without boundaries? If you haven't seen it already, or my colorful joke didn't give it away, look at diagram 2 closely. The knowledge of someone, or the knowledge of humankind. That which we obtain when we open up to one another. More than pure math, pathos, schmathos, migos, and any chosen endeavor is the love of mankind. And no banal iteration of this fact can ever extinguish its fame. Flame. I was supposed to say flame, but sometimes in these essays I do get caught up a bit. I originally began this essay saying it's easier to judge nonfiction, and by that I meant it's easier to turn down. Compare the style of this essay with my last few. Don't I sound quite judgmental? At least when a character is wrong about something, I can still tolerate the narrator. And when the narrator is wrong, the author has the power to make us sympathize. But when the author is wrong, and he says fame instead of flame, it's fame. It's fame. And I don't know much about them. Get me out of here! Help! Help! A Gordian knot, the definition of nonfiction. Woe on those who categorize, I suppose, for passing that classification nonfiction down. I have already hinted at separating from nonfiction math, natural science, philosophy, and history, especially when the latter 3 are done rigorously into the given field of study's full extent, or when supplied by an author whose magnanimous personality justifies the error. I also do not count the autobiography or the dialogue as nonfiction. The autobiography is timeless, because the best ones are true narratives, like Ray Monk's Wittgenstein, The Duty of Genius, or Paul Mariani's The Broken Tower, The Life of Hart Crane. And dialogues are trustworthy because in their best form, they are the precise renderings of an internal conversation. Let me say too that I do not mean to set this essay up to pick apart any social or softer science. I consider any deep study a natural science. Psychology, anthropology, architecture, even business, the whole lot, insofar as the student of that nature holds steady in their cogitations a few metaphors between mankind and the plant and animal kingdoms. I will bark a little more against nonfiction before I let it pet me. I have to bark the praise of my masters. Like Nabokov's John Shade in defense of Shakespeare's purple passages, I too roll upon them as a grateful mongrel on a spot of turf fouled by a Great Dane. From that same passage, Nabokov, through his own life's main character, explains how best to teach Shakespeare. First of all, dismiss ideas and social background, and train the freshman to shiver, to get drunk on the poetry of Hamlet or Lear, to read with his spine and not with his skull. Maybe nonfiction is just a little more skull than I like. One last thing. Did you know I have scoliosis? I don't know how else to say it, but that I'm a spoiled dog when it comes to nonfiction. Maybe I'm that jealous stalker who gets upset when my loved one isn't being noticed by others. Seriously, I'm spoiled. Nabokov, Goethe, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Thoreau, Emerson, all poets so far, some dabbling in philosophy. Read Peregrine and Parapilomena. Pascal, Saint Jerome, Madame de Guyon, okay, Saints too. Why read the others? And how are we even to classify the anecdotal truth constellations that span a work like In Search of Lost Time? What about the scientific implications of Thomas Pynchon's historical fiction? Or other mighty compendiums in Plutarch, Agellius, and Robert Burton? This is why this essay can't last too long, because it really is as simple as us just talking and liking what we like. Peep a little bit more of my style, reader, and then look at my other stuff, because if I have to wade the moral waters just a little bit more longer, I'm going to be quite the angry prune. You know what? The most concrete and efficient writer would win your trust somehow, and then simply hand you a short list of his major influences. So, besides my loved ones, and my other works, please read the others I've listed in this essay, and Vauvenard, Chamfort, and in Emerson's terms, those who practice high criticism, or sublime literary criticism, the close readers. Shelley is our prototype, and Coleridge our Virgil. They are to highlight the things critical to the lovers of literature. Most exceptionally, in the past 50 years, I mean Harold Bloom, H.C. Goddard, and certainly my master in poetry, Donald Revell, who always gave the most beautiful and engaging lectures on caritas, the space of the poem, being kind, being a civilian, the right words in the right order, writing to discover, editing savagely, cutting an onion signifying the good poet, sliding through mud at Woodstock, the devil riding at night, the trip greater than the journey, and trusting the metaphor. For a 20-minute glimpse of his joy and poetic knowledge, see this Q&A he gave right around the time I got to know him in the description below. Or better yet, read his Death, or one of my long-term favorites, Against Pluralism. Perhaps I must face the truth that I'm putting off beginning this essay because I'm struggling with the idea that I have a lot of catching up to do. That's the kicker with nonfiction. It is dallying. It can either be one thing or the next or both, but it's doing none of this. Give it to me straight, or hold my rotted attention. And the surest path for a writer to hold the reader's attention is to not only be able to pronounce things correctly, but is also to be able to hold their own attention. Forget all other categorizations. Surely we all accept the power of pure attention. Please know, reader, that I know that I've already begged your ultimate patience, and if it seems as if I've tethered on the end for quite some time, rest assured that I do not dare pen another line that does not attempt to delightfully instruct us both. And like Ishmael says in defense of the in-depth cetology, found halfway through Moby Dick, when is a better chance for the reader to experience such a lesson than out with the whalemen themselves? And now that I've set my sail for literature, now that I approach that frontier alongside my contemporaries, I must be a good and fair judge as I can. If I indeed join the realm of nonfiction, I must be ready to disagree, and I must be ready to be nice, and I must promise to read more, to realize discernment is best trained through experience, and if I want to lift my peers up and prevent a few truths from slipping through the cracks, I'm going to have to brace for error myself. I don't know what my holdup is, reader. I'm almost ready to move on. I hope I never have to talk about this again. I do pride myself, over the span of all my works, in not saying the same thing the same way twice. Who knows? Maybe I'm putting off writing about the brilliant Nadine Gordimer, this essay's inspiration, because I have 243 books in my room, and 8 of those books are by women. Emily Dickinson, Sappho, Anne Sexton, Gertrude Stein, Celeste Albury, E.B. Browning, and a few Jane Austens. Used to have all of hers. I think I let some students borrow some. Wow, Lucas. Wow. You should have bought that complete plath. I counted my 83 additional books downstairs, right here, for accuracy, and there I have no book by a woman author. I told my wife this, and she smiled and shook her head and said, I've been telling you. Of the first 18 books I counted of hers, 12 were by a woman. So yes, you could say I have some catching up to do. My polemics instead have taken us so far off course that I've put aside the original shower thought for this essay, that nonfiction is easier to judge. What I really meant by that is the errors in nonfiction are unforgivable when the narrator's character is shallow. Who of us gravitates towards those that lack depth? Is this not why children are so delightful to be around, that the depth of their character is yet unknown? In any case, the judge asks, what are the defendant's signs of redemption? If the narrator tells you to call him Ishmael, or even if the author exercises our humor with a distinct voice, then the stumbling is not only tolerable, but now the writing has been lifted out of the obscure realm of nonfiction and has become poetry, which is the truth relayed by all the senses. Character necessarily develops in poetry, since the sum of every human motive works like the wind and water around us and through us. And since the most transcendental writing takes place in the mode of discovery, the attentive writer cannot help but wonder at the character of every single word. It is for this same reason that whenever we sense the message or the moral being pushed upon us, the magic is lost. The writer, either tired, angry, depressed, lazy, or otherwise stubborn and mean, has forgotten to give themselves up to those around them, and so they have lost every character but their own. This is what every innocent child weeps at, being the sad fate of the adult. Not to say we can't write as ourselves or be ourselves, and that the writer can't generally know the moral of the essay before beginning, but just like when talking to someone, friend, foe, or fella, if you operate line by line in any other way than letting out the natural born truth as it appears to you to say it, you're either a phony, or you need way more slack. Nonfiction is like stand-up comedy. I don't hate it. I don't. It really is hard to listen to someone for 15 minutes, let alone 15 hours, and even the most senseless polemicist knows when his diatribe is played out. Admitting is another thing. I myself can only hold fast to arrogance for so long without feeling like a big dummy. Thank God for the medium of art that, instead of pretending to know what life means, shows us life at its every stage and leaves the purpose for each of us to discover. Purpose cannot exist without the story. Cling to the idea of nonfiction, and you usurp memory, who quite enjoyed watching you get along. I've shown you my bias, but let me show you my fantasy. After having read a book from Hungary, Nigeria, then the Raw Shark texts, then Pynchon's Bleeding Edge, then from Ghana and Kenya, and after having read The Prince of African Poetry, or Black Whitman and Yeats, Leopold Senghor, I thought I would take my talents to South Africa, and there I stumbled upon Nadine Gordimer. And for some reason, I began with her essays. In the very first essay, 3 in a Bed, Fiction, Morals, and Politics, despite a gorgeous style best described as H.L. Mencken and Chesterton's younger, more promising cousin, who learned by their negative examples to be kind, I found myself disagreeing with the essay's central tenet that everything, in the end, is politics. Or, it seems there is no getting away from the relationship between politics and fiction. I've heard this argument everywhere, on the four corners of the internet, as an undergrad and in graduate seminars, in my high school classroom, in high school and afterwards, where my 11th grade teaching coworkers flocked, from my papa, from my friends, from my wife. I don't disagree. How can I? From a certain point of view, everything is also sex, money, and Counter-Strike. So I soon found myself in the shower blurting out that line I've since erased. Nonfiction is so much easier to judge than fiction. The original start of this essay. So filled with bias are we, and so bereft of clear influence, that if you pause to consider the manifold variables that precede every brilliant discovery, every word in the right order, then you might believe me when I say, hey look, it's classification, oppression wearing a red dress. The only lament now I can't quite shake is that this was my first impression of the magnificent storyteller Nadine Gordimer. Not any of her 15 novels or her short stories whose gravitas matches Hemingway's at his best. But how can I complain when I've been spurned to add to the discourse? And does she not earn her mulligan by delivering in the same essay the most condensed, accessible allegory of the white whale? Quote, "The whale is the agent of comic retribution. We have sought to destroy the splendid creature that is nature, believing we could survive only by winning a battle against nature. Now we see our death and the death of nature brought about by ourselves." End quote. Bless you. After having eked out, quite leisurely, half of this current essay, I then moved on to Nadine Gordimer's short stories, all in one in lifetimes. And even just in the first half a dozen stories, I've been blown away by her humanity. In Face from Atlantis, we are treated to nostalgia being brought to life in the form of Carlita, who won't accept that her beauty fades. It's like a cross between the Black Mirror episode San Junipero and the later season episode Hotel Reverie. The two best episodes in my opinion. In Which New Era Would That Be? We see the behind the scenes before, during, and after a white woman tells a group of black men, quote, "It's hard to be punished for not being black," end quote. In The Smell of Death and Flowers, thanks to Gordimer's negative capability, we follow the journey of a 21-year-old white woman who wants to do something against social injustice, and we learn with her it's in the unprivileged seeing the privileged sacrifice themselves where something miraculous happens. And in The Soft Voice of the Serpent, a young man with a missing limb and phantom pain is visited by Moby Dick in the form of a cricket. Gordimer's fiction is so loaded with truth that I want to spend more time in it and unveil a bit of the magic of her style, and explicate the tragic and comic aspects of her characters to help myself and anyone else who is looking for something sweet and useful to do. If her final story, The Raw Second Coming, such a clean and well-lighted place, doesn't convince the reader of categorization's harm, nothing will. These stories move me so much that their elucidation deserves its own spotlight, which to make room for, even this eye-rolling grease monkey of an essay gladly shuffles off the stage, knowing he's said what he has to say. Now I got a good, nice stretch having my legs on the couch that whole video. My left hamstring. Let's see if I can't stretch the other to make it even. Alright, folks. In case I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.